there you have that EU setting again. In the EU, they already started a new law on deforestation. And for 6 crops already, as of the end of this year, the importers in the EU have to seriously take care that there is no deforestation on their 6 crops. And then it's crops like cattle, wood, soy, coffee, cocoa is already on the list, cashew not. But of course, anybody that thinks ahead, they realize it will be there probably soon. And probably rather sooner than later. Me, myself, I take it for myself, I was not that busy with deforestation of cashew. We were the last 20 years more busy on how to grow the crop.
Indien à l'est de Madagascar. Donc pour moi, la question du changement climatique est une question de survie. Donc toutes les projections montrent que mon île va être submergée dans les décennies à venir, ce qu'a fait nos prédécesseurs. Par contre, je pense que c'est un sujet qui est très délicat et qui demande énormément d'investissement pour trouver l'information. Je ne pense pas qu'aujourd'hui, dépendre d'images satellitaires et faire des projections et avancer dans une direction pour publier des grands rapports, c'est pour moi pas la meilleure approche. Mais je pense que c'est une bonne approche de se poser la question. I think the investigation to act is obviously not to contribute to further deforestation in Côte d'Ivoire. To establish our theory that cashew is actually the crop of resilience when it comes to deforestation issues, because there are areas where cocoa is not growing, and we are assessing I would say the surface area where cashew has actually become a crop of resilience for our farmers, where cocoa is not growing and it's being replaced by cashew. So for us, it's about also the livelihoods of our farmers.
Ne nous arrange pas nous-mêmes, ce qui fait que on a des productions qu'on ne maîtrise pas qui vont sur le marché. Tout le monde perd de l'argent, mais produit mieux. Et c'est pour cela que les politiques, la stratégie d'accompagnement des producteurs, pour faire en sorte que les plantations existantes soient des plantations qui soient réhabilitées en termes de matériel végétal et en termes d'intensification de la production sur les mêmes surfaces, c'est ce qui est mis en œuvre.
Et qu'il n'y avait pas de marché, certains producteurs étaient tentés de couper les arbres pour remplacer par d'autres spéculations. Et depuis la création de l'interprofession en 2015, c'est devenu notre combat. Comment protéger les prix minimum garantis aux producteurs à travers des bonnes pratiques agricoles, améliorer la qualité, augmenter le rendement, faire des cultures intercalaires. Parce qu'on a compris que ce n'est pas en grandissant le verger et on fera plus de revenus. Non, c'est en maîtrisant bien l'existant, en améliorant la qualité, c'est en augmentant le rendement qu'on pourra maintenir le producteur dans la production.
Referring to, how do you combine an increase of income for farmers, so farming remains interesting for farmers, so you have to intensify, versus making it more extensive? Well, in fact, it means that more farmers have to work on more land, which doesn't in the end make more money, so to speak, if you have more land to work on. setting again. In the EU, they already started a new law on deforestation. And for 6 crops already, as of the end of this year, the importers in the EU have to seriously take care that there is no deforestation on their 6 crops. And then it's crops like cattle, wood, soy, coffee, cocoa is already on the list, cashew nut. But of course, anybody that thinks ahead, they realize it will be there probably soon. And probably rather sooner than later. Me, myself, I take it for myself, I was not that busy with deforestation of cashew. We were the last 20 years more busy on how to grow the crop.
Indien, à l'est de Madagascar. Donc pour moi, la question du changement climatique est une question de survie. Donc toutes les projections montrent que mon île va être submergée dans les décennies à venir, ce qu'a fait nos prédécesseurs. Par contre, je pense que c'est un sujet qui est très délicat et qui demande énormément d'investissement pour trouver l'information. Je ne pense pas qu'aujourd'hui, dépendre d'images satellitaires et faire des projections et avancer dans une direction pour publier des grands rapports, c'est pour moi pas la meilleure approche. Mais je pense que c'est une bonne approche de se poser la question. I think the investigation to act is obviously not to contribute to further deforestation in Côte d'Ivoire. To establish our theory that cashew is actually the crop of resilience when it comes to deforestation issues, because there are areas where cocoa is not growing, and we are assessing I would say the surface area where cashew has actually become a crop of resilience for our farmers, where cocoa is not growing and it's being replaced by cashew. So for us, it's about also the livelihoods of our farmers.
Ne nous arrange pas nous-mêmes, ce qui fait que on a des productions qu'on ne maîtrise pas qui vont sur le marché. Tout le monde perd de l'argent, mais produit mieux. Et c'est pour cela que les politiques la stratégie d'accompagnement des producteurs, pour faire en sorte que les plantations existantes soient des plantations qui soient réhabilitées en termes de matériel végétal et en termes d'intensification de la production sur les mêmes surfaces, c'est ce qui est mis en œuvre.
Et qu'il n'y avait pas de marché, certains producteurs étaient tentés de couper les arbres pour remplacer par d'autres spéculations. Et depuis la création de l'interprofession en 2015, c'est devenu notre combat. Comment protéger les prix minimum garantis aux producteurs à travers des bonnes pratiques agricoles, améliorer la qualité, augmenter le rendement, faire des cultures intercalaires, parce qu'on a compris que ce n'est pas en grandissant le verger et on fera plus de revenus. Non, c'est en maîtrisant bien l'existant, en améliorant la qualité, c'est en augmentant le rendement qu'on pourra maintenir le producteur dans la production.
Referring to how do you combine an increase of income for farmers, so farming remains interesting for farmers, so you have to intensify, versus making it more extensive, while in fact it means that more farmers have to work on more land, which doesn't in the end make more money, so to speak, if you have more land to work on. setting again. In the EU, they already started a new law on deforestation. And for 6 crops already, as of the end of this year, the importers in the EU have to seriously take care that there is no deforestation on their 6 crops. And then it's crops like cattle, wood, soy, coffee, cocoa is already on the list, cashew nut. But of course, anybody that thinks ahead, they realize it will be there probably soon. And probably rather sooner than later. Me, myself, I take it for myself, I was not that busy with deforestation of cashew. We were the last 20 years more busy on how to grow the crop.
Indien, à l'est de Madagascar. Donc pour moi, la question du changement climatique est une question de survie. Donc toutes les projections montrent que mon île va être submergée dans les décennies à venir, ce qu'a fait nos prédécesseurs. Par contre, je pense que c'est un sujet qui est très délicat et qui demande énormément d'investissement pour trouver l'information. Je ne pense pas qu'aujourd'hui, dépendre d'images satellitaires et faire des projections et avancer dans une direction pour publier des grands rapports, c'est pour moi pas la meilleure approche. Mais je pense que c'est une bonne approche de se poser la question. I think the investigation to act is obviously not to contribute to further deforestation in Côte d'Ivoire. To establish our theory that cashew is actually the crop of resilience when it comes to deforestation issues, because there are areas where cocoa is not growing, and we are assessing I would say the surface area where cashew has actually become a crop of resilience for our farmers, where cocoa is not growing and it's being replaced by cashew. So for us, it's about also the livelihoods of our farmers.
Ne nous arrange pas nous-mêmes, ce qui fait que on a des productions qu'on ne maîtrise pas qui vont sur le marché. Tout le monde perd de l'argent, mais produit mieux. Et c'est pour cela que les politiques, la stratégie d'accompagnement des producteurs, pour faire en sorte que les plantations existantes soient des plantations qui soient réhabilitées en termes de matériel végétal et en termes d'intensification de la production sur les mêmes surfaces, c'est ce qui est mis en œuvre.
Et qu'il n'y avait pas de marché, certains producteurs étaient tentés de couper les arbres pour remplacer par d'autres spéculations. Et depuis la création de l'interprofession en 2015, c'est devenu notre combat. Comment protéger les prix minimums garantis aux producteurs à travers des bonnes pratiques agricoles, améliorer la qualité, augmenter le rendement, faire des cultures intercalaires, parce qu'on a compris que ce n'est pas en grandissant le verger et on fera plus de revenus. Non, c'est en maîtrisant bien l'existant, en améliorant la qualité, c'est en augmentant le rendement qu'on pourra maintenir le producteur dans la production.
Referring to how do you combine an increase of income for farmers, so farming remains interesting for farmers, so you have to intensify, versus making it more extensive. Well, in fact, it means that more farmers have to work on more land, which doesn't in the end make more money, so to speak, if you have more land to work on. setting again. In the EU, they already started a new law on deforestation. And for 6 crops already, as of the end of this year, the importers in the EU have to seriously take care that there is no deforestation on their 6 crops. And then it's crops like cattle, wood, soy, coffee, cocoa is already on the list, cashew not. But of course, anybody that thinks ahead, they realize it will be there probably soon. And probably rather sooner than later. Me, myself, I take it for myself, I was not that busy with deforestation of cashew. We were the last 20 years more busy on how to grow the crop.
Indien à l'est de Madagascar. Donc pour moi, la question du changement climatique est une question de survie. Donc toutes les projections montrent que mon île va être submergée dans les décennies à venir, ce qu'a fait nos prédécesseurs. Par contre, je pense que c'est un sujet qui est très délicat et qui demande énormément d'investissement pour trouver l'information. Je ne pense pas qu'aujourd'hui, dépendre d'images satellitaires et faire des projections et avancer dans une direction pour publier des grands rapports, c'est pour moi pas la meilleure approche. Mais je pense que c'est une bonne approche de se poser la question. I think the investigation to act is obviously not to contribute to further deforestation in Côte d'Ivoire. To establish our theory that cashew is actually the crop of resilience when it comes to deforestation issues, because there are areas where cocoa is not growing, and we are assessing I would say the surface area where cashew has actually become a crop of resilience for our farmers, where cocoa is not growing and it's being replaced by cashew. So for us, it's about also the livelihoods of our farmers.
Ne nous arrange pas nous-mêmes, ce qui fait que on a des productions qu'on ne maîtrise pas qui vont sur le marché. Tout le monde perd de l'argent, mais produit mieux. Et c'est pour cela que les politiques, la stratégie d'accompagnement des producteurs, pour faire en sorte que les plantations existantes soient des plantations qui soient réhabilitées en termes de matériel végétal et en termes d'intensification de la production sur les mêmes surfaces, c'est ce qui est mis en œuvre.
Et qu'il n'y avait pas de marché, certains producteurs étaient tentés de couper les arbres pour remplacer par d'autres spéculations. Et depuis la création de l'interprofession en 2015, c'est devenu notre combat. Comment protéger les prix minimums garantis aux producteurs à travers des bonnes pratiques agricoles, améliorer la qualité, augmenter le rendement, faire des cultures intercalaires, parce qu'on a compris que ce n'est pas en grandissant le verger et on fera plus de revenus. Non, c'est en maîtrisant bien l'existant, en améliorant la qualité, c'est en augmentant le rendement qu'on pourra maintenir le producteur dans la production.
Referring to, how do you combine an increase of income for farmers, so farming remains interesting for farmers, so you have to intensify, versus making it more extensive? Well, in fact, it means that more farmers have to work on more land, which doesn't in the end make more money, so to speak, if you have more land to work on. even, and there you have that EU setting again. In the EU, they already started a new law on deforestation. And for 6 crops already, as of the end of this year, the importers in the EU have to seriously take care that there is no deforestation on their 6 crops. And then it's crops like cattle, wood, soy, coffee, cocoa is already on the list, cashew nut. But of course, anybody that thinks ahead, they realize it will be there probably soon. And probably rather sooner than later. Me, myself, I take it for myself, I was not that busy with deforestation of cashew. We were the last 20 years more busy on how to
Recording in progress.
Indien à l'est de Madagascar. Donc pour moi, la question du changement climatique est une question de survie. Donc toutes les projections montrent que mon île va être submergée dans les décennies à venir.
Good morning and good afternoon to you all, and welcome to this webinar. My name is Ernest Minta, the Managing Director of the African Cashew Alliance. Today, the cashew industry is one that is highly and knowledge. To be successful in the industry today, you must have credible information to take critical decisions that are necessary for the survival of your business. The African Cashew Alliance, as a knowledge and information hub, has been delivering conferences, forums, and webinars to enhance the knowledge base in the cashew sector over the years. As the cashew industry continues to develop, issues of sustainability has become eminent. The European Union, as a key market for cashew kernels, is progressively introducing stringent regulations on the crop and on other sectors. And it is only a matter of time that cashew will be affected. The question, however, is whether we must wait for such regulations to catch up with us before we act. The answer obviously is no. But the key question remains, what must we do to be ready? And it is in response to this key question that this webinar entitled Cashew Sustainability Series becomes very important. The Cashew Sustainability Series is an initiative of the ACA and the Sustainable Nuts Initiative, SNI, and is funded by the European Union, OACPS, and the GIZ. Evolving out of the Cashew Roadshow, which started early 2024, this webinar will be held quarterly to serve as a platform for cashew industry players to discuss various cashew sustainability issues. For this maiden session, we will focus on the topic, growing a sustainable cashew supply chain. Permit me at this point to introduce to you the moderator of this webinar, a man I have personally known since the past 2.5 decades, when he consulted on multiple value chains in Africa for us back then in SNV. Back then, the talk of sustainability had just begun, but not with the momentum it has today. Probably at a time we're trying to define what was the meaning of the word sustainability. Our moderator is also the coordinator of the Sustainable Nuts Initiative, SNI, established in 2015 by leading companies in the cashew industry. The SNI platform currently has 15 members from across the globe. Our moderator is also the founder and director of Fair Match Support, FMS. FMS is a network organization specialized in developing sustainable agricultural supply chains across the world. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our moderator for today's session and indeed for the rest of the whole series, Herman Oedibosch. Hello, Herman, how are you?
Good morning, my dear friend Ernest. I'm very well. Thank you for introducing me like that.
Very good. It's always a pleasure to see you. And you are the right person to walk us through this whole agenda of preparing for the day when, it's a matter of time though, a day when all these regulations will come knocking on the door of the cashew industry. So please, I hope you are ready for us. And please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ernest. And good morning to you all, or maybe for some already even good afternoon. I have been introduced, so I don't go further into that. And the Sustainable Nut Initiative, like Ernest was mentioning, is a platform of the industry already since 2015, but I think in the last 3-4 years, pushing even harder and further, because especially there is more legislation coming up from the EU, so it becomes more a general issue, so to speak, which is giving us some wings, as one could say. Currently with 15, but we are seriously growing. And in that platform, we try to seriously push and drive sustainability and see how we could make that happen. And we were very pleased, and we realized that we had to be more in the open. And at the start, we were more internally orienting what we should do, discuss how we should address issues, what we should do at processing level, what we should do and stimulate at producers level. And then we realized it might be good as well to seriously discuss it in a wider audience. I think the last couple of years we have been active also on request of the ACA on their conferences, and the last 2 years even in the plenary sessions, which I think is also showing the interest of the issue. When we started the idea of webinars, we also thought, let's not do it on our own. For us, it's very logical to do that with partners like the ACA, which for us is the partner in Africa, as they in fact combine all the actors in the African setting that are working on cashew. So for us, it turned out, and they have a very good webinar setting. So we reached out to ACA, and I think that meeting took about 30 seconds when Anna said, no, let's do it jointly. And so this is also why we are very pleased that we can do this jointly, but also jointly with Cashew, who is supporting us already for quite a long period. And we are very pleased to that, with the background support also of the EU. We are seriously very pleased with that. We were struggling a little bit with the content of the webinars, to be very honest. For those ones who are in this setting already for a long period and have been playing around with sustainability issues, probably it would be the best way to move now into the final details of the CSDDD of the EU or the EUDR, etc., etc. But we also realized that a lot of people are not that familiar with all those settings. And it's even like that a lot of retail actors have virtually not a serious clue on what the sector looks like. And it should be, so maybe the first session, we should first have a look on what does the sector look like and where we perceive serious issues on sustainability. So that is, so this will be a kind of introductional call, an introductional webinar. And the next ones will go stepwise much more into depth and into that, and then we will also, and I think that is also what we are looking for, invite and ask some people as well to go for how did they deal with the different issues, so we can learn from each other in order to move further into the sector. So we are very pleased with this, and then we had to find somebody who knows the sector very well, and it did not take us a long time because we and I thought of a close friend, Maria Zanio, who has been working in the sector for decades as well. Some people know each other already for a long period as they have been moving. But Maria has not only been moving in cashew, she also moved in quite a number of other crops. Although she is based and stationed in either Accra or Abidjan, she has traveled Africa and Asia quite extensively. She worked, when we first met, it was quite some years ago, she was working for the private sector for a Dutch retail company. So she has a huge experience in supply chain development, in innovation, but also looking, and innovation has different sides. It has technical sides, it has social aspects, and she's a learning person that always thinks, what are the next steps? She's less busy with what happened, but more busy what are the next steps to come. she's a very privileged, I'm very privileged to introduce her to you. She's working now with Cashew already for a long period. And that is also why we asked her, could you give us an overview on the total sector and what is happening where, and what do you perceive as key challenges, key issues in the sector as such? And could you guide us a little bit, not into that, because we will ask that in the next webinars, but could you cross-check? So also the retailers start to understand stepwise what are the issues. Is it easy? Can we easily change this sector? And where are the challenges? How do we have to go around them? So that is the introduction of today. So for those ones who are expecting today already seriously in that issues, they will be a little bit disappointed, but we will get there stepwise because we would like to take everybody along. And in this sector, I'm not going to mention names, but quite some time ago, a serious company who does a seriously good job in the sector was not busy with sustainability. They had not even thought of how to improve their supply chain from farmers. They were not that busy with all the changes in the EU, and it's a serious, serious company. So we realized, let's get everybody together in this first webinar, and we move on more into that in the next ones to come. Mary, can I invite you to share your knowledge and experience? And when people have questions already during the setting, please put them in the Q&A. We will try to collect them, and because after the presentation of Mary, there will be plenty of time to raise questions and move on. For the French interpretation that is available, then you have to go to there is a button, I think it's on the button, there's a language issue. Yes, there is interpreter, if I'm not mistaken. You can find it in your Zoom on the bottom line. And maybe if you have changed your screen, it's on the top line, but it's one way or the other. Mary, can I please invite you to move? You're muted, Mary. You still have to unmute yourself.
That's right. Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be on this webinar on behalf of the SNI and also the African Cashew Alliance. I'm very delighted to make the first presentation, which is on the overview. Allow me to share my screen, and we start the presentation from there. Thank you. So please confirm that you can see my screen. Hey man, do you see my screen?
Yes, it's there.
All right, great. Thank you very much. So honorable participants of this first series on cashew sustainability webinars, I'm delighted to share with you briefly the overview of sustainability challenges in the cashew sector. And for those of you who are already champions, who are already deep in the sector, I'm sure that you will recognize the topics and some of the topics, some of the issues that we will mention in this presentation. Thanks to the collaboration between SNI ACA to have this private sector-led topic on sustainability in the cashew sector. So I'll just go to starting with the overview, and basically I would like to share that this, as you see on the screen, is a summary of how the cashew sector looks like. We have inputs such as planting materials, which are then used by farmers to grow the cashew. Once the cashews grow, we have aggregators that are collecting the nuts, either for domestic processing or for export before they are processed. And then once we have the white kernel, so we are moving from the area where we're talking about raw cashew nuts, and once they are processed, we have what is called cashew kernels. And then the kernels are then going through further processing, then exported, then further processed, such as roasting it, salting it, spicing it up, as you may wish, to get this crunchy, delicious cashew that we all love. Once we get this is going to the retail and then to the final consumers who are so happy always to have cashews because they are delicious, they are nutritious, and they are healthy and serve as very, very convenient snack all over the world. So this is how, in simplified form, the cashew sector looks like. Now, if we go to the next slide, we will see that the sector appears really straightforward, as I have shared on the previous slide. However, would like to inform you that the cashews currently we have about 5 million tons of cashews produced worldwide by smallholder farmers. So I was trying to check how many smallholder farmers are involved, and I did not get a exact figure, but I know there are over 2 million farmer households that produce cashews worldwide. And once they are produced, they are allowed most of the time to drop, and they are picked and aggregated by different people. And here on this slide already, you see we have local traders and buyers, we have buying agent, district traders or collectors, assemblers, or different names as you may see. In the African French countries, you have pistes at this time, aggregating the cashew, the raw cashew nut. Then in most cases, as currently you are aware that about almost 60% of the world's cashew are produced in Africa, about 35% in Asia, and 5% in Latin America. The reality is that most of the cashews, 85%, are then exported in the raw cashew nut form. And this is exported by international traders, by brokers, RCN brokers. Then the product goes to a processor. This is the case for probably 60% of the world's raw cashew nuts. In this case, I'm talking about Vietnam, that is processing its own domestic production, about 400,000 metric tons. India is processing its own domestic production. Africa strictly transforms or processes only the domestic raw cashew nuts. For Vietnam and India, who are the two major processors worldwide, processing about 85% of the world's cashews, they have these two value chains. So they are processing their own domestic nut and also importing for India more than 100% of their own production. And for Vietnam, they are importing more than 5 times their own production because they have high opportunities to process, but the production is low. Now, moving from there, then the processed kernels at this stage now enter the kernel export market. And here again, you see there are many buyers. We have the kernel brokers, we have importers, and then most of the time the cashew is further processed after it's been exported. It is further processed by the roaster, manufacturer, or food ingredients users. Today, use of vegan food is very popular, and therefore cashews are also used highly as food ingredients before the product is finally reaching the consumer through the retailer and food services, mainly in North America and in Europe. Now, if you look at this chain, you realize that from the domestic processor, in this case, I'll use Africa as an example. If cashew or when the cashews, raw cashew nuts are processed, then it now goes into the export market. You will realize that here we have some problems. The first is that the chain is very long, it is fragmented, And you can see how many actors are involved. This obviously poses challenge in terms of being able to have a transparent value chain because the product goes through many hands, many intermediaries before it reaches the final consumer. Therefore, the question of traceability becomes key. How are we able to really tackle the question of traceability? I'm buying some cashews and then I realize that I'm checking where is this cashew coming from, and you see this product maybe come from Mozambique or Vietnam or India or Indonesia or probably Benin. Please. So this is the issue for cashew, that it is very complex chain. Therefore, it's difficult to really have traceability, and that limits the extent to which the sector is currently able to track the product from farm to fork. So we will look at generally what the issues are. And the first issue we want to look at, that the sector is highly trader driven. And when we talk about trader, we're not only talking about the fact that it goes through many actors, many intermediaries, and it is actually bought and sold. But we're also looking at the fact that there could be a time where even the farmer may have a trader perspective because they decide, I want to export this directly. And there are some cooperatives that are doing this, selling directly to international traders. There could also be, and we have observed that there are also some times where even a processor may have the trader mentality or the trader's perspective, because there are, based on the market situation, based on the market dynamics, may decide this is a time to export the raw cashew nut rather than processing. So that really poses challenges for the sector. And I spoke about the limited transparency, which actually affects the ability to have traceability in the sector. We have observed from the previous slide the many actors, the many intermediaries, making the chain very long and fragmented. The cashew value chain is a very, especially the raw cashew nut also, is a very important export chain, or a very important crop. And this, for that purpose, government would like, especially now we see more and more involvement of government. And we notice, or we have observed, that government would like to facilitate the process and also protect the various markets. This poses challenges. And the first challenge is that the market is very volatile. It is difficult for businesses to really plan systematically because it becomes very unpredictable what could be happening next. I spoke about traceability, and you saw the long, complex, fragmented chain. That poses problem for traceability. And if we look at the current EU regulations on the EUDR, where we need to trace our products from farm to fork, we need to start thinking as a sector how we want to address the situation of traceability. In terms of profitability for producers and farmers, the key issues are that the cashew sector currently is billion-dollar, billion euro market. However, the distribution of the profit is not balanced. It's not equal if we look at the entire supply chain from the farmer side to the local processing. That means processing from the raw cashew nut to the kernel to the roasting and then the retailing. The profit margins are not even, and that poses challenge for the sector. On the next slide, I would like to just share briefly on the current production systems that we have. So here you can see that cashews are produced in Latin America, that is to your left on the screen, in Africa, and then in Asia. And the deep green is actually showing us the major producing countries from Cote d'Ivoire, which is in Africa, currently the main producing country with over 1.2 million tons, which is representing almost 25% of the world's cashew production, to Cambodia, Vietnam, Tanzania, Nigeria, and other countries that are currently the main producers. So if you look closer, okay, my arrows didn't come, but I would have loved to show you back to this map how the cashews are transported. I think in the next slide, I'll be able to show you how the cashews are then transported from Africa, mainly because Africa is producing about 60% of the world's cashews. However, processing as at 2023, 14% of the crop. So, or currently having 40% of the market share. So that means a lot of the cashews produced have to be exported. It poses other challenges that I will share shortly. So in terms of production, the cashews are produced mostly by smallholder farmers. The labor that is used is not really labor intensive. We cannot say cashew production labor intensive. However, it remains manual from the time of planting to any farming activities such as even pruning. These are labor, these are still manual activities and involves the whole household. And therefore, farming households have to do a lot of labor manually. We have observed over the years price fluctuations, and sometimes we are asking why is the good agricultural practices, the best practices in the sector not adopted by farmers. However, our observation is that most farmers do know what it means to really take care of their farms. However, when prices go down, for example, the attention they pay to the farms reduces. For example, they may not go to pick the nuts. We're looking always at how much is Ivory Coast or Cote d'Ivoire producing this year, how much is Ghana producing this year. In reality, when farmers feel that the prices are good, they go ahead and collect most of the nuts. And where the prices drop, they collect less. And therefore they have more cashews left on the farm. So each time we talk about the production of a particular country, let us also be aware that it is about how much the farmers actually are investing in collecting the nut from the farm. If everything is collected, and I know some really, really good practices with some processors in Africa that are working closely with the processors, closely with the farmers, closely with the farmers to the extent that they helping them to say, this is how you collect the nuts, and helping so that no nut is lost. If we get to this extent, you can really see that the amount of cashews available go up. But wherever prices become a challenge, then adoption of good agricultural practices go down. We also observed aging orchards in many countries, I think mainly African countries. And so that is a challenge because it means that we need the sector, when I say we, I mean the sector, need to think about how those orchards will be re-innovated and to ensure that we don't have issue of too little supply compared with the demand, because the demand is growing annually, about 4% annually. And farmers, unfortunately, do not have enough resources to renovate their farms, to build it up, to change old orchard for new ones. Farmers usually will sell their products, I mean the raw cashew nut, through the cooperatives. That is those farmers that belong to cooperatives or they sell to traders. And the reality again is that most farmers do not belong to any cooperative, so they are selling individually. That really reduces their bargaining power. The sector currently is very, very informal and is slowly becoming formal. So if we look at the challenges that the current production structure poses, number one is on living income. I mentioned shortly that the farmers have difficulty with, or they have difficulty with bargaining position. They do not have bargaining position, mainly for several reasons. Number one, the prices are determined by global commodity markets, global commodity trading, and the farmers don't have a voice in how much the raw cashew nut cost. Secondly, they work as small scale farmers, as individuals. They don't have bargaining power. And therefore, based on the power dynamics and the concentration of power in some sectors compared with the level of farmers, having living income for farmers becomes a challenge. Farmers, in this case, I'm not talking about living income only from the production of cashew, but they have farming systems because most farmers also produce food crops for their families. And the challenge is that getting adequate income to reach the living income level is a social challenge. I have also explained earlier that cashews are produced by smallholder farmers, and therefore household members are involved in the sector, in the whole production system. So the potential of child labor, currently there's no evidence of child labor in the cashew sector. However, we need to pay special attention and to ensure that child labor is not occurring. When we look at environmental challenges, the first topic is about deforestation, and the EUDR, as we have, as it was introduced, has shown that we need to pay attention to deforestation. Cashew production is expanding in many countries. If we look at already 2006, Africa's production of cashews was at 34%. Africa had 34% of the global share of the production. Today, if we look at 2023, this share has increased to 58%. Cambodia was not on the cashew production calendar. Today, Cambodia is the number 2 producer of cashews. So we are expanding the area under cultivation. We are growing more cashews. There is very little research work to really increase the yields, which will give us the same results. So we have less space, less area under cultivation, but with really good planting materials, we'll be able to have the same quantities that we need. But currently, the budget available for research work is very limited. Therefore, yields, especially in Africa, are low. So all that I'm explaining do not apply to every country. I think this is something I should, it's a disclaimer that some of the information relates to some countries more than others. And so again, coming back to deforestation, if we are increasing the area under cultivation, we also need to pay attention to deforestation. And there is more clearing of land to grow more cashews, which result in loss of biodiversity, and therefore the climate is no longer good enough for the whole for the biodiversity, for the fauna and the flora, for the animals and for the plant in our biosystem. It is important for us to pay attention to this And in addition, I also want to share that in the past years, climate change has increased. And we have observed El Nino effect and other effects, which are actually affecting the total production, total yield of cashew in several countries. I remember having discussions with colleagues in Cambodia, and they said, yes, this year there's El Nino. We think the production may go down. Same for Africa, same for West Africa. So the trend towards climate change and its impacts continue to increase, and that poses environmental challenge. And therefore, these are issues we need to pay attention to. Currently, unfortunately, we don't have enough data to really see if and to what extent there's deforestation, and to what extent there's loss of biodiversity. So we need to also, as a sector, keep thinking about what does it mean for us. We need more data to really look at the environmental impacts of the total supply chain and how that affects the total ecosystem. When we look at the economic challenges, we look at vulnerability towards price volatility. I have explained this to a large extent. There is vulnerability because every year, and even within the same year, within the same season, you will observe prices go up and down throughout the season. And therefore that makes it really difficult for businesses to plan. On the other hand, for farmers, they have difficult bargaining position because of the different power dimensions and the power concentrations. Potential yields, especially in Africa, are not reached. Currently, the yields in Africa, we continue to work on them. And it is observed that yields are growing, but not in every country. Some countries are more advanced than others. And we can also see that if we look at the statistics for the volume produced by different countries over the past 10 years, you can see where there is really fast growth and where there is very slow growth. And these are all linked to the research and the ability to really disseminate information to farmers. That makes it difficult. For Asia, Vietnam, and India, the yields are better. We have information about yields of about 1,500 kilos per hectare, which is good. In Africa, these are less, and there's still a lot to do. And you can see that all these challenges are interlinked. For example, if we talk about yield, if we do have higher yields, the challenge of deforestation hopefully will be any potential risk of deforestation can then be reduced because we have higher yield per hectare. And so the farmers can grow the same or smaller land surface and get the same quantity of cashews that are needed. So this challenges that are cited here are not isolated, they are all interconnected. And this is why we have these green arrows showing the interconnectivity between the different potential challenges that the sector is or could face. Now, let's talk a bit about the processing area. So, first thing is that every country that is producing cashew also do have some level of processing. So in this graph, we are showing the producing countries as well as major processing countries. And the countries in deep green are producing more than the rest. And they also are the ones processing more. So we could have currently the number one processor globally is Vietnam. As I said, Vietnam is producing about 400,000 metric tons of the raw cashew nuts, and at the same time importing annually about 5 times their own volume produced. So you can see the amount of cashews processed by Vietnam annually, exporting over 400,000 or about 400,000 metric tons of kernels annually to the US, to Europe, and to other countries. India is number two processor. India produces about 750,000 average metric tons of cashews annually and is importing the same quantity or more annually to process in India. However, India is the country that is it is also consuming what they produce, and I'll come to that when we come to the market. So India is the number 2 processor, and then we have Cote d'Ivoire, the emerging country that has worked extensively. The government of Cote d'Ivoire has put in place infrastructure for processing and actually boosting the processing. And you can see, we have seen with the data that is available, that in the past 7 years, the processing in Cote d'Ivoire has really increased from about 40,000 metric tons to currently over 250,000 metric tons. And it is growing, and we are very optimistic this will continue to grow. From Cote d'Ivoire as number 3, we have Brazil, which used to be a main producing and processing country, currently processing at about number 4 globally. Then we have Nigeria as number 5 processor. Then Tanzania, Benin, Burkina Faso, Ghana, other countries follow. So what this actually means is that currently we have at least 60% of the global cashew that is not processed in the country where it is produced. So there's a lot of products to export. And in this case, we're talking about raw cashew nut traveling across several oceans, traveling across several countries to get to the main processing countries, mainly Vietnam and India. And that poses other challenges I'll speak about briefly. But what we should pay attention to is, what does it mean for us if we are not processing the cashews in the country where they are produced? It's a big challenge because it affects the carbon dioxide emission greenhouse gases that are produced. If we have to carry, let me put it this way, or travel with the cashews all the way to Vietnam to process and bringing it back. When we get to the other slide on market, you will see that this same cashew is traveling back. And every cashew that is processed, let's say in Vietnam, is actually passing through 2 oceans, passing through 13, at least average of 13 tracks. The cashew have to go in and be repacked and retransported. So all this poses a lot of environmental problem for the sector. Now, let's have a look at this slide where we have highlighted a bit the issues. So on this slide, we see that the cashews that are produced with their value addition. And as has been explained, mostly the value addition is taking place in Asia for the nuts and for the shell. About 85% of the world's cashews are processed in Asia. And that comes also with the processing of the cashew shell. The cashew shell is processed into many beneficial products, CNSL, or the cashew nut shell liquid, for electricity generation, for plain fuel, for dye, for tea, for other things that are used, the shells are used for, mainly for energy generation. Brazil is known for processing the cashew apple. So let me explain that. When we say we're producing, let's say, 1 million tons of raw cashew nuts, it also means that we are producing 1 million times 8. So the cashew apple is about 8 to 10 times the volume of the nuts. So while we process the nuts, which is 5 million, multiply that by 8, between 8 to 10. Let's go for the lower value. So we are also producing probably 40 million tons of cashew apples that are not used at all. And the country that pays most attention to the processing of the cashew apple is Brazil. Now, cashew apple can be used for many things. First of all, it can be consumed as normal fruits, just like we have apples or we have bananas, we have mangoes, oranges are consumed. And Brazil have advanced with the Embrapa that have developed many varieties that are important for the Brazilian market and are therefore consumed as fruits. There's also the cajuna or the cashew apple juice, because cashew apples have the most, when you take the juice, you take the apple 80%. If you have good processing efficiency, you have 80%, which is liquid, which is used for juice. But it can also be used for jams, jellies, and some few processors in Africa also process the cashew apple. I can mention Burkina Faso, where the cashew apples are dried for the Swiss market by Gebana Afrique, for example. Cote d'Ivoire also currently is developing many products for the cashew apple and other countries as well. So there is a huge potential for exploiting the use of cashew apples and to add value for its use. Cashew processing in general provides working opportunities, especially for women. It provides seasonal jobs for women, and at least 80% of those working in the processing sector are women. Now, we say seasonal jobs, that comes with challenges because there is no job guarantee in most of the cases. I would say we have really very good best practices, some very good models that are emerging, especially in Africa, where selected processing companies are giving all year round contract to the processors, to the women, so that they can have full-time job and they are assured of job guarantee. However, this is not the case for majority of the processing workers. We have issues of subcontracting, where we have observed that some processing companies do not recruit the workers directly. However, they subcontract the contracting to another organization. In this case, it is difficult to see what is happening. The standard, the food safety standard, the quality standard, the occupational health and safety standards that are in the main organization. How do we ensure that the same are prevailing in the subcontracted organization, and therefore workers in these organizations are benefiting equally? If we look at Vietnam, there's a lot of outsourcing of parts of the processing, mostly the shelling or the peeling side, depending on the organization. And so what we have observed that there are major organizations or processing company. Company A is processing cashew, however, have outsourced part of the work to other organizations to do. And in that process, it is difficult to really assure that the standards are the same, or we just do not have overview of what happens in these outsourced, let me call them enterprises or outsourced facilities. It's difficult. So there is that in terms of transparency, in terms of traceability, there is a potential risk of losing transparency, losing food safety standard because of subcontracting or outsourcing. Now, if we look at the EU regulation, CS triple D, which is currently in place for some other commodities, cocoa, rubber, and others, not yet for cashew, then we need to, as a sector, start thinking of what does it mean for us? How do we prepare ourselves to ensure that we can really respect this regulation or when we actually start or the day cashew become part of the commodities that are supposed to really respect the CS triple D. So this are some topics as a sector we need to start paying attention to. What does it mean for us? There is also disparity between the raw cashew nut and kernels. And the two chains are not usually moving together. If we are even looking at pricing, at the beginning of the season, let me take this year, you could see that we started off with raw cashew nut prices that are below the values for last year. And the kernel prices were also even far below. By May this year, due to different actions, interruptions that took place in the sector, we saw that kernel prices moved up. And for the first time in 14 years, we saw some parity between the raw cashew nut and kernel prices. But this is not always the case. And so this is also a big issue in terms of business planning, in terms of worker conditions, in terms of profitability or economic gains for those in the sector. Now, geographical differences. We also have geographical differences in Africa, India, and Vietnam, and I have cited some of them in terms of how the structure looks like currently. They are not totally the same. Vietnam, for example, is a big giant in processing. They have the technology, there's a big government support, and therefore processing keeps growing. If we look at India, it's similar. India have had huge support from the government. And at a point, there is subsidy given for importing raw cashew nuts. Africa is emerging. Cashew is becoming more and more important for us. And we can see the example of Cote d'Ivoire, where government has put in place different measures to really push processing up. And we can see the figures in terms of the quantities that are going. And as well as in terms of food safety. Every cashew processor in Africa currently is pushing to have the right food safety standards. And that is a good opportunity for the industry. The other thing I would like to mention about Africa is the single roof processing. So in Africa, I think almost all processors are single roof. So traceability is easier because we are also just not importing. Importing cross-border trade is very limited, and you can guarantee that cashews that are processed in a particular African country is coming from that country. So in terms of traceability, I believe that it's also easier for African processors to take advantage, because then we have the opportunity to have single roof processing at origin, and therefore traceability could be easier. So we have some geographical differences that each origin can really pay attention to their strengths and work on issues that need more attention. Now, let's have a quick look on the social challenges. So again, the issue of living income. Are we meeting the regulations of the CSDDD, Triple D? Recently, I think earlier this year, we have CNV International that did a quick study in Cote d'Ivoire on the labor issues, a first in the sector. To be documented. The key issues remain that workers in processing factories in most countries, I'm not talking only about Africa, I'm talking about all over the world, India, Vietnam, Africa, get seasonal jobs. And therefore, it's not always evident that they are receiving the living income to meet their daily needs, to meet their basic needs. Then we spoke about the contract and job security. It is difficult because of subcontracting or outsourcing. So the other end of the chain is not transparent. It's difficult to see what is happening there. Then it's also difficult to really guarantee that occupational health and safety in a main facility and outsourced facility are the same. The other issue we mentioned was the long travel time for the cashew, especially if we're looking at processing in Asia, in Vietnam, that is importing 5 times its own production. India importing at least the same quantity of cashews that they produce by themselves. So the question of greenhouse emission for environmental impact becomes an issue. So in Cashew, we did a study, I think around 2018-19, on the carbon dioxide emissions and what it means if, for example, we take Ghana and we produce the cashews in Ghana and process them in Ghana. How does that compare in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions compared with if we were sending this product to Asia to be processed, and we notice that there's already 30% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. So it definitely says that if we process the cashews at origin, we will be reducing the negative environmental impact of long travel times for the cashews. And of course, we need to pay attention to what we call on this slide waste management, but we're actually talking about shell processing. Shell, the tester. Today, we don't know how that in Africa particularly, the tester is hardly used. In India, I know this is used for other things, animal feed. How do we ensure that processors in Africa also have more gain in terms of shell processing, in terms of the tester? What shall we use this for? So there's a lot more we need to do. And again, you can see that there's no guarantee for profitable margin because of the various issues raised. And cashew generally is a huge volume, low profit crop if we look at the primary processing. So guaranteeing the profitable margin remains an issue. And if we could look at all the factors that are on this slide in terms of social challenges, in terms of waste management, in terms of processing the shell and others, this will enhance the profitable margins for processors. And one of the other factors that is affecting the inability to guarantee profitable margin is also the high volatility of the markets. It is difficult and very unpredictable to plan. First, we have the decision on who decides when and at what price the raw cashew nut or kernel to be sold. And also the topic of actually making it very competitive, processing and making it competitive. That makes it difficult to really have profitable margins. The power dynamics and the concentration of powers, again, play a role in the processing sector, as we have seen also for the production. Now, let's have a look at the markets, what happens in the markets. And here we'll see again that most of the producing countries are also processing. However, I would like to add one dimension where we now have the markets in place. So today, India is the #1 consumer of cashews. 37% of the world's cashews are consumed in India. So India is processing and also consuming, and therefore very little is actually entering the international export market. So the main countries that are exporting kernels are then Vietnam to the US, to Europe, to China, and other regions. And in Africa, the market share for African countries is also growing, currently at 14% of the global market. I think that is very positive, and because if we want to really ensure origin processing, this is the way that the sector should go. So beside India, we have the main consumers being North America, about 20%. Then we have Europe. And then we have China. China emerging market is growing, currently about 9%. Then we have Middle East as the main consuming countries. Now, we will also talk briefly about what that means for most of the sector. And as you can see already, we have most of the cashews coming from Africa, going to Asia for processing, and then coming back to Europe, North America. So you can see that we have long travel time, which affect carbon dioxide emission. We have also the fact that the cashews have to really travel long distances. So if we are looking at the different characteristics of the cashew market, first of all, there is a growing demand for cashews because currently the market is growing about 4% per annum. And we saw in the past few years for Europe and US, more cashews being consumed annually. So there's a rapid growth of the sector. We look at this year, for example, in the first half, Europe grew about more than 20%. They imported more than they have done in the previous years, and similar for the US. China is growing. However, if we want to look at what this means for sustainability, because that is the topic of our presentation, we are looking at the Cashew Sustainability Series. And this is the first in the series. This is the first only regarding the overview, general overview. And in the future presentations, we'll deep dive into the various issues individually. Now, if we look at Europe, Europe has stricter sustainability standards. We now have the new EU regulations that are demanding social and environmental challenges to be addressed. The EUDR and the CSDDD currently are affecting other commodities like cocoa, not yet cashew. However, as a sector, we need to think through because this legislation will be reviewed. What does it mean? How do we prepare ourselves to meet the various legislation that are taking place? Because Europe is a major market. US demands makes higher demands for sustainability. However, they are not as strict as the EU, and there's not specific regulation beside the food safety regulations and having the PCQR or specific expertise for the companies that are processing cashew. The US is demanding food safety, Europe is demanding food safety, but beside that, there are stricter regulations, stricter standard for Europe. If we look at Africa, other regions, especially let me mention Africa as one example, the key issue is that there is very low consumption of cashews. We don't have, I think this is increasing. If I look back 10 years, this is definitely increasing, but we do not have data yet on how much is being consumed. If we look at the global map of how much cashews is consumed, Africa is not there, even though we are the major producers. So this is also an issue that we need to pay attention to, this low consumption and what it means for sustainability in general. China is emerging markets. It has grown currently to about 9% of the global market share, but there is really weak demand for sustainability. Same for the EU, same for the UAE, United Arab Emirates, which is a major or emerging consumer, but very weak demand for sustainability. And of course, there are others. Now, in this webinar, we are discussing sustainability. So we also have to pay attention to if the main consumer concerned with sustainability is Europe, What does it mean, first of all, for Europe? And what does it mean for us as a sector trying to work towards sustainability? Who is on board? Who is going to support us to really get to the level that we need? And the day that we have the EUDR covering cashew, what does it mean for us? If we do have more, if we do have so much cashews traveling across several oceans to be processed and then back to the market, what does it mean when we start really looking at sustainability for cashew? What do we need to do differently? And who will do it? How do we do it? Who is going to lead? And who will actually be there to support the smallholder farmers? As I have explained, they are household farmers, mostly working as individual farmers. Most of them are not in cooperatives. Who is going to support them? So these are some of the issues we need to start thinking about if Europe is the main origin looking at sustainability. Now, let's have a look at some takeaways because I'm coming to the end of my presentation and I would like to share some takeaways that we should reflect on. First of all, sustainability is a transition. It's not a one way to go. It's not a one, it's a process. And now we have many actors. We have lack of traceability. How do we get there? It's a topic that we need to start paying attention to. How do we get there? How do we ensure that the many actors and many intermediaries in the chain are informed? And together we can actually increase the traceability of the sector. The market is very volatile. And because of this unpredictability, we have explained already the reasons for this unpredictability, the power dynamics, the concentration of power at one side, the fact that prices are decided on the global commodity trade, by the global commodity trade. There is therefore the risk of investment. How do we ensure investment, first of all, at the production side and also at the processing side to really ensure sustainability? We have looked at some of the issues. We have looked at traceability. We have looked at deforestation as some of examples. How do we do this? Then, of course, the last slide before this one spoke about the different market standards for sustainability. EU market is very engaged. EU is the driving force for change. What does it mean for EU? And what does it mean for the rest of the market? Because as a processor, I think what the EU need to pay attention to is that processors all over the world will decide as individual companies who they want to sell to. I'm just going one step back before I come back here because I want to use this slide to explain this. All the processors globally will decide who they want to sell to. US is asking for higher sustainability, but they are not really straight. China has really weak sustainability, and Middle East even less. So who are those who are driving the sustainability? It's only EU at this stage. So what it means is that processors all over the world, based on what is easier for them, will decide who they want to sell to. And therefore, it appears that EU, with the stricter sustainability standard, need to pay attention to this and actually lead the transformation. EU need to lead the transformation. EU need to lead the discussion, and they have to be really committed to this, to meeting the standard for sustainability. Otherwise, the risk is that EU may be creating a difficult situation for itself because the processors can choose to sell to somebody else. They can choose to sell to US but not the EU. So EU, I'm inviting you that you need to lead. You need to be fully committed and support the whole transition from farm to fork. This is the picture that is currently obvious, and we need to pay attention to that. However, we have spoken about different challenges, what is happening in different countries, but I want to just take the opportunity to also assure every participant that there are really promising initiatives by early movers. We have seen early movers at the processing side. We have seen, I can give examples in Africa for best practices to really assure sustainability. And this is really promising. So the picture that we have shared in terms of challenges may look like a lot of work to be done. Yes, true, there's a lot of work to be done, but it is possible. And as industry, I'm moving from Asia to Latin America to Africa to all the producing and processing countries because we have seen really promising initiatives. We know it is possible to really meet this sustainability goal. So I invite everybody to join in meeting this standard to reflect together in your small groups, in your countries, in your different sectors, in your companies. What does it mean for us? What shall we do differently? What are we doing so that you can already identify what are we doing right and what do we still need to do? With this, I believe that as a sector, we can move forward. And in the subsequent upcoming webinars, we will be having a look at individual topics and we'll invite experts to deal with this. We invite you to join the different webinars that are upcoming. And I would like to take the opportunity to thank you for your attention and see you soon again in the next webinar. Thank you.
Oh,
Back to
Mary.
you, Herman. Thank
Aha,
you.
exactly, Mary, because we're not leaving yet. It sounds the last words after your perfect speech, your perfect presentation sounds as we are stopping already, but that is not the case. First of all, thank you very much. I think it was a very clear and description of what a sector looks like these days. And sometimes it looks, the overviews give the impression that everybody knows, but most of the time the experience is that is not the case. And also within the sector, if you are a farmer, most of the time you have no clue where your product is moving to. You have even processors have no clue sometimes where they source from, except for the trader, etc., etc. You gave a good impression. You also gave a good overview on the challenges that we have, like the unorganized or still very informal traders-oriented part, the lack of traceability, issues like living income, deforestation, climate change. Just as you also mentioned, I will start, and I saw that quite a number of questions, interesting questions were raised, and I will get to that later. You mentioned the EU. Do you see, in fact, because I hear the question quite a lot in the sector, is what the EU is demanding, is that an opportunity or a threat? How do you see
I think
that?
it's a big opportunity. This is a big opportunity to really put to work on sustainability. I see this as a big opportunity because it allows us to really think through what is working well, what we need to pay attention to, and actually correct them. Because these are very important, not only for EU, but even for us, for the farmers, for the processors, to be a sustainable supplier of cashews. So I see this as a huge opportunity, and it is just the beginning. And I think that when we get to the level, when we are able to prepare ourselves, we will see the big benefits that will follow.
Okay, thank you. I will. I saw some interesting questions. I will mention the names of the people who put them, also to honor them because they seriously raised the question. I saw one interesting one of Daouda Yao. He questions, what are the off-takers doing? The cashew kernel buyers, do they contribute to the value chain in making it more sustainable? He compared it with the cocoa industry, where of course all the large companies at the end of market are visible. What is happening in the cashew sector? Could you elaborate on that a bit, Mary?
Yes, thank you very much, Yao, for your questions. I think it's a very important question in the sense that we see different levels of engagement of buyers at this stage. The first is that I have explained that Asia is processing most of the cashews, and the topic of sustainability, as Ernest mentioned during his opening, is that we have looked at this, but not very extensively for cashew for a long time. And the Sustainable Nut Initiative, this is their goal, to really bring the topic of sustainability on the table so we can have more engagement. Now, yeah, be aware that for cocoa is really good to compare. And I'm always happy to learn about the sustainability drive of the cocoa sector, but these are two separate value chains. If you look at cocoa, the chain is a bit, in my mind, straightforward in the sense that we have fewer buyers, and the buyers are mostly Europeans who are driving. As you can see, you saw on the presentation, it's Europe that is driving the sustainability. And therefore, I imagine it could be easier. In the cashew sector, we have a lot of actors, we have a lot of intermediaries, we have the cashew going to Asia and then being processed. And the market, as we see now, only EU is actually very much engaged on this topic. So the engagement level is less than that of cocoa yao. And the purpose of this webinar series is to really sensitize everybody and to bring more people on board so that we can really tackle this topic better in a more holistic way.
Thanks, Mary. Another one, completely different one from Blaise Satsi. She would like to know more about, say, the working conditions in the processing industry, and she mentions especially the issue on the caustic burning when you crack manually. And she asked whether there are efforts to introduce safer equipment or protective gear for these workers.
Thank you very much, Herman, and thank you to Blaise. I think I got her name or his name right. Thank you for this question, because I see this in the media, especially in the past. We have seen reports from some origins where this has been an issue. In cashew, in Africa, for example, where we started the African Cashew Initiative, this was already some 10 years ago, the training efforts that have been put in place is to ensure that this is not an issue. And therefore, processors, workers are trained. There are three things we do in the factory that ensure that this is not happening. Number one is that workers are using gloves to process. However, sometimes it feels uncomfortable to them. So not everybody, or sometimes they are not wearing gloves. And to ensure that there's no problem with CNSL, we call it CNSL, the cashew nut shell liquid, is not negatively impacting on their skin. We also have, if you have ever visited a cashew factory, you will see that you have oil, maybe coconut oil or some vegetable oil that workers put on their hand to really protect their hand. And when this is done, there's no issue. So this is the training that is provided to workers, especially in Africa, because I am working in Africa and I have visited many factories. So this is how this issue is addressed, either by wearing gloves or by putting the hand in oil. Machines, I'm sorry to tell you, Blaise, that machines are not yet efficient for cashew processing. So if you talk to a processor, they will tell you that part of the work is always done by hand. And this is why we need to protect the hand. And this is why we do it in these two ways. So machines will basically support with doing part of the work, but cashew remains partly a manual work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary, as well. Martin Akiman, he was asking, and he's thanking you also as well for the presentation. He is asking whether the sector is already aware and does enough at this moment in time to address deforestation and biodiversity, and what is happening in that part.
Yeah, Martin, good to hear from you. Thanks for joining also the meeting, the webinar. So the sector is not fully informed. I think we have been paying attention to increasing the yields, increasing the production, because I think when I joined Cashew, then African Cashew Initiative, the key issue was supply demand. How do we ensure, because the demand was growing, People just love cashew. They consume it. It's tasty, crunchy, nutritious, and all very healthy. So how do we ensure that there is enough production to really meet the market? That had been the big goal. So the topic, and we were looking at really to how to work towards that, because the yields in Africa are low, as you know. Brazil is no longer a major production area. India is consuming more and more, so therefore Africa has to produce more, for example, to feed the market. So the concentration, the focus had been on higher yield, best practices, good agricultural practices. Deforestation, I think we, as a sector, we haven't done enough in this area. And this is also, again, the reason we want to do more sensitization and see as a sector how to address this. The other element is that we don't have enough data. To really be able to quantify if there is deforestation at all, and whether this deforestation is due to cashew or something else, mango or whatever. We need data, and this is lacking. And this is why I also mentioned research is very important for the sector if we want to really address these topics of sustainability.
I fully agree with you, Mary. I think fortunately there is more attention to it. There has been some research, especially on the booming countries like Ivory Coast and Cambodia, but there's still a lot to be done, and that is very clear. Kim is raising a question. Thanks for sharing your knowledge, Mary. What would you currently see as the biggest challenge to get to a more sustainable supply chain? So now you have to pick one in order to get moving, Mary. Could you enlighten us your opinion on this one?
Yeah. My opinion is that the topic of transparency and traceability is the most crucial, because if we can address this topic of traceability, transparency, then we can have more information, more data on what exactly are we really having problem, or is there any challenge on workers' living income? How much, to what extent is the problem of living income? To what extent is the problem of deforestation? To what extent? So I think for me, the biggest topic is transparency and traceability. It's the same thing. If we address that, I believe strongly that we can address, or we can have more data to address the other issues.
But because Kim is also asking, how would you overcome it? So if you have a traceability system in place, so we know exactly where, say, each nut is coming from, how would it help us?
Yeah, so first of all, one person cannot do this. Kim, you saw the long chain, very fragmented. We are not necessarily talking to each other yet in terms of sustainability. We talk on, I want to buy cashew, what is the price, but we're not discussing sustainability together. So it's a huge work, first of all, because we need to make sure everybody in the chain really understands this topic. But the other element, as you saw, is that not every market at this stage is having any regulations or legislation on this topic. So first of all, we need to reflect, decide, and I invited the EU in this sense that as the driving force, we need to clearly define how we want to go about it. There's no one way to doing this, but I believe strongly that we need to reflect on that, outline how we want to do it, who should be involved, how do we involve the other regions that are not yet talking about sustainability, and take few decisions on how we want to address this. It has to take place, otherwise it will be difficult to, but I know it's possible where we have the data, it gives us more information, but we still, again, I see we need one body, or we need a body that is actually collecting the data, saying what does it mean for the whole sector, and actually comparing the data in terms of where the best practices are and how that is supporting the industry.
Thanks, Mary. A delicate one. It's always a delicate one, and that is, you mentioned it as well in your setting, but Genevieve Marshall Ufumu is asking it as well regarding child labor. It is mentioned in this chat on that probably the risk is very high. You mentioned something else, so I would like to have your opinion about it. As cashew growing is a high workforce demand activity, do you share that, or do you have a different opinion on that one?
Thank you. So child labor is about having children doing a work that is above them. That if you look at the age, this work is too much for that child, or that child is deprived of going to school and not be able to do their normal work as a child. So if you look at it this way, we have done some spot check, and I believe that child labor is not prominent in the sector. Cashew is produced by families, so therefore they go to the farm. However, what we have observed so far is that children are supporting, maybe in picking the nuts, which they sometimes will sell for themselves or for their parents. But that is not a work that is above the child. This is where we have observed mostly children supporting in terms of picking the nuts. But when it comes to child labor, you have to assess what is the child doing that makes it a child labor. If picking a nut, I think it's not only about the cashew sector. If a child is supporting to pick the nut, this is not a work that is above. We will talk about child labor when that work we think is too much for that child, for their age. And we have not observed that in the cashew sector. In addition, I would like to say that, again, we need more data. We have not observed. That's my first statement. Secondly, I think that more studies, more research should also reveal if and to what extent child labor might be available. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Mary. And I agree, we have to be aware, although we should also be careful not, because it's a very delicate subject, not to create the image that it's there if it's not there. So we need to know, and if it's there, then we have to work around it. I have one last question, also looking at the time. And to be frank, I seriously liked it because it's a promising one. It's about the future. It's about how youngsters would like to see that we are moving towards. It's coming from Olaiualo Agoro. He is asking how we could also support mechanization in the farming part, especially for the young ones. What is your opinion on that one, Mary?
Yeah, this is a topic I love so much because I believe strongly that when we are able to mechanize, especially also cashew production, I think processing is growing. The mechanization at the process side is growing and is evolving. Now, when it comes to the production side, it's mainly manual. And this is where I see the need for mechanization. Now, for young people to be able to go into mechanization, I think this is possible. My observations are that it's difficult for farmers to reorganize their farms. We have in the past done annual yield surveys where we are looking at the farming structure, how to really reorganize it, but sometimes it's difficult to reorganize because these are tree crops and farmers are sometimes reluctant to cut down those trees. The other element is land tenure system. So I will say that if first of all, if a young person or when a young person decides to go into farming, it's possible. In various countries, we have new planting materials that are available. They should start from scratch planning. I think they start with the planning that they want to have a farm that a tractor can drive in, a farm that can be harvested in a different way that we are doing now. I remember that Sese Akonse Kuto Anakad in Cote d'Ivoire was developing a tool, for a simple tool for harvesting cashews. But if you look at the structure, the current structure is more difficult. So starting from scratch, think through, plan how to really mechanize the farm. That has been the first step. And for existing farms, we continue to do the sensitization, and I believe that we can get to a point where farmers are willing to do this mechanization, but the farming structure will have to change. The way we plant the farms currently will have to change so that it is more modern and we are able to mechanize it.
Thank you, Mary. And I'm looking at the time, and it's very good to see there are still questions coming up in the Q&A. So, but I think we have to close for this moment. And But the chat will remain open for the next 30 minutes, so people can still continue and also network jointly. Thank you very much, Mary, for this overview. I think it's a seriously good overview. And I'm sure that some might have seen, I knew this already, because they have been in the sector and in the total sector for a long period, but I'm also very sure that it gave a very good overview on what is happening, how complex this supply chain is, how long, intraceable, informal, and that we have a huge challenges ahead. But we can also make those challenges and reverse them, as you mentioned as well, into opportunities. Because if you make your supply chain sustainable, you should not do that for somebody else. You should do that for yourself in order to improve your own production, in order to be more climate resilient, to be more interesting for buyers and off-takers. I think that is the reason why you should do it. And let's try to see how we can make use of what is happening. Of course, in this part, there was a lot of issues that we need to deal with. And of course, that it was good to do that in the first webinar. In the next ones, we're going to be more in depth, like Mary was saying as well, on the issues. And we would like to get some people on board on how to solve them and how to deal with it, in order also to share the best practices. And the best practice does not mean that it was a walk in the park. Most of the time, it has been a struggle. It has been an investment, and sometimes you were not even paid for it. So we will get to that in the next webinars, and we haven't chosen yet the right setting, but it will definitely be on issues like traceability, like you have mentioned, direct sourcing. I would say it has not been mentioned in that way, but I know it's in your head as well. Deforestation will definitely be an issue, and also to see how we can do this jointly in the supply chain. There is no such thing as moving ahead just on your own. There's an African saying, if you would like to go fast, go on your own. And if you would like to go far, and sustainability is a far walking distance, you have to do it jointly. Thank you very much again. And thank you very much also the audience. It was good to see that people stayed. It's very nice for us to see how many people joined. There were over 100 and we are still there. So it also means that people found it interesting. That is one of the first critics you always see if people drop out. They did not. So that is very good. Thank you, ACA, as a partner in this setting for making this jointly able, and as well as Cashew and the EU ACP. Looking forward to see you again at the end of March, and have a good day. Until then, bye-bye.
Recording stopped.
And there you have that EU setting again. In the EU, they already started a new law on deforestation. And for 6 crops already, as of the end of this year, the importers in the EU have to seriously take care that there is no deforestation on their 6 crops. And then it's crops like cattle, wood, soy, coffee. Cocoa is already on the list, cashew not. But of course, anybody that thinks ahead, they realize it will be there probably soon. And probably rather sooner than later. Me, myself, I take it for myself, I was not that busy with deforestation of cashew. We were the last 20 years more busy on how to grow the crop.
Indien, à l'est de Madagascar. Donc pour moi, la question du changement climatique est une question de survie. Donc toutes les projections montrent que mon île va être submergée dans les décennies à venir, ce qu'a fait nos prédécesseurs. Par contre, je pense que c'est un sujet qui est très délicat et qui demande énormément d'investissement pour trouver l'information. Je ne pense pas qu'aujourd'hui, dépendre d'images satellitaires et faire des projections et avancer dans une direction pour